Let's bring in our panel of legal experts. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody, Stuart Kaplan, former FBI agent, and George Washington University Law School professor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, I want to start with you. You've had some time to digest this. We've seen what we've seen. We actually don't know some key things in this so far, but your take overall.
Well, frankly, the more we hear, the more confusing this becomes. You know, to hear the account of these ongoing negotiations and meetings into June, you're still left with this question of why they decided to order the raid on the residence of the former president. You had them sitting down and discussing presumably specific documents. In the very least, they could have used a subpoena to achieve this same result. And so there is this question about the means and the timing of the raid. There's also suggestions that they could have had an alternative purpose, that is, they're using the classified documents as a way to get January 6th evidence. If that's the case, they could be really laying the groundwork for serious repercussions. Some of these people could follow Peter Strzok into private employment if that's the case, because it would mean that they misrepresented their purpose. They used a pretext before the court. That's exactly the type of dishonesty that the FBI was found to have engaged in during the Russian collusion investigation.
Madam Attorney General,
it's not clear that that's the case.
Yeah, right. Madam Attorney General, thanks for coming on. Your thoughts? You're down there in Florida. This is a big event, obviously, and your thoughts on the legality, but what we don't know. There's a lot we don't know.
Well, you can see, you know, just the passion and I will use the word uprising in South Florida. I mean, many of the people in South Florida fled totalitarian regimes from Cuba or Venezuela. And when you see that a government that comes in and has targeted, we know previously, parents who were labeled them as domestic terrorists. When you have a government that's just announced increasing their agents for the IRS by, 87,000 agents to target American citizens. And now you have an unprecedented raid on your former president, potential political opponent. And there's this idea that you could start going after criminally political opponents. I mean, that is the motto of any type of those regimes: suppress political opposition. And I think what we needed today is we needed a president to come out and say, I will assure the American public that we will not weaponize the DOJ. I will ensure that Attorney General Garland comes out and explains why this process was done, why it was necessary, why they couldn't do this investigation through subpoenas. I think that was important for the American people whose heads are spinning after the revelations we've seen in the last couple of years. And you saw the press secretary come out and cower. She said he's still got a cough. 5 reporters asked her if the DOJ was weaponizing this criminal investigation against a political opponent. 12 times she didn't answer the question. The answer is simple. No.
Stuart, I want to ask you from an FBI perspective. This is a big, big deal, unprecedented to go to a former president's home. Obviously, when you make that case, the cause for getting the federal judge to sign that search warrant, we don't have the search warrant. We don't have the affidavits that support it. What are your thoughts?
Let me be frank, Bret. This is equating to pulling a hand grenade, pulling a pin out of a hand grenade, throwing it into a room and walking away, and with no concern for the collateral damage. This was an absolute missed opportunity for the FBI. Going back to then former director James Comey, when he was terminated or fired in May of 2017, he left a trail of damage and destruction where, for the first time, the integrity and the legitimacy of the FBI was now being called into question. The damage was immeasurable. It was irreparable. I cannot understand that the sitting present director Christopher Wray would not have appreciated and would have realized that, generally speaking, the affidavit, as you suggest, is not released to the public nor to the target of the search. But given the divisiveness and given the understanding and the appreciation as to what this would have caused, and we're seeing it play out since yesterday, I implore the FBI and the Department of Justice to release the affidavit. Listen,
let me ask you this, Stuart.
Would the former president, let it all hang out.
Would the former president or his team have some paperwork, like a search warrant, not the affidavit supporting it, but some list of what they took? Or
they would have. Well, so they would have the face sheet, which is the actual warrant, which authorizes the legitimacy of any law enforcement agency to go into the premises and conduct their search. It will also reference potentially the violations under federal statute, but they would not have the affidavit in support, which would have generated the authority. The inventory list will be returnable within 10 days, but that will all be returnable under seal. So Donald Trump and his lawyers will not see what was seized, nor will they ever see the affidavit until such time as it becomes unsealed. And generally, an affidavit in support of a search warrant is only unsealed when someone is formally charged. That's why there should be an exception to the general rule. Release the affidavit. Let's see what the urgency is. This idea that they were concerned about the destruction of evidence doesn't hold weight. We know now Donald Trump was up in New York City. So how do you make the argument that they were concerned about him destroying evidence or destroying documents when he's up in New York? You can't have it both ways.
Jonathan,
it really has now demoralized the men and women of the FBI. It's at an all-time level.
Last thing, Jonathan.
At the very least, have an honest conversation with the American people.
Yeah.
Even if you don't release the affidavit for the investigation purposes, which I've said transparency is a must, at least have the courage to stand before the American people and assure them that their DOJ will not be weaponized.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Jonathan, last thing. What are we not thinking about here is you would think, well, first of all, the Attorney General had to know, the FBI had to know, the President says, the White House says they didn't know, but those men would realize the import and the political considerations here of this image. What are we not thinking about?
Well, that's what's so troubling here is it's unclear why they took this course of action when they could have used less intrusive means. And you keep in mind, of course, that this is the former opponent of the current president and the likely future opponent of the current president. That alone would seem to militate heavily towards less intrusive means. But what is really particularly odd about how this unfolded is that they're saying that they're looking for classified documents that they're engaged in discussion over. Those documents likely were identified. They could have obtained them through subpoena. And so the question that's going to be coming up more and more until it's answered is why this particular course at this time. They couldn't have adopted a course that was more sensational for this moment in time.
As we take a look at that timeline, they were doing negotiations. They were having talks. Keep going to the next slide. And they fell apart. And at some point, they go to get the affidavit. The federal magistrate signs it. It's a criminal investigation. And the FBI searches Mar-a-Lago on the anniversary of the day Richard Nixon resigned from office. Pretty amazing. Panel, thank you so much.